Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to Threshold of Hope, where we take a look at some of the documents of the church. Before we do that, I want to mention that we're celebrating two saints, or one saint, one blessed. Saint Oliver Plunkett was the Archbishop and Primate of Ireland. He was born in 1625 and was martyred in 1681. If you recall, the English had been working hard to subdue Ireland, and the English were fighting amongst themselves, for one thing. You had the Puritans, who had done horrible damage and widespread killing across Ireland when they led their English Revolution. But then, even after the Restoration, the kings of England wanted to enforce Anglicanism, what they called the Church of Ireland, on them. And the Irish held on to their faith. They didn't take to either the Puritans or the Anglicans. And they suffered, thousands and thousands died, for their faith in Ireland. And the Archbishop himself was one of them. So he stood up for his faith. But also today we celebrate Blessed Junipero Serra. Blessed Junipero was a Franciscan who came to, then Baja California, which is now part of Mexico. And because the Jesuits were kicked out of all the Spanish realms, they had been running the missions in Western Mexico and were going to go to California, but they were kicked out by the Bourbon kings of Portugal, Spain, and France. And so the Franciscans took the mission, and Blessed Junipero was very kind in helping the Jesuits who were imprisoned and suffering terribly. But then he went on to start the missions in California, trying to get them each a day's ride apart, to evangelize the native Californians and to also keep strong the faith of the Spanish settlers. So his missions are now the cities of California. That's why going through California is like going through a litany of the saints. San Gabriel and Our Lady of Carmel, Our Lady of the Angels, now called Los Angeles in Spanish for us, and San Diego, and so on and so on. So we have much to think of. And he's one of a number of priests who are in the statuary hall at our nation's rotunda. And he and Père Marquette and a number of others, Kino and variety of others, but hopefully that he too will be canonized a saint. All right, now we are continuing on with the document Fides et Ratio, which means faith and reason. You can get a paperback copy from EWTN's religious catalog. Simply go to EWTNreligiouscatalog.com, or you can call them 1-800-854-6316 and order a copy, a paperback copy. Or if you prefer, you can download a free electronic copy of Fides et Ratio by simply going to our website, EWTN.com, go to the document library there. When you get there, type in Fides et Ratio, and you can download that into your computer for free. If you want to print it out, you have to pay for your own paper. Also, we will love to have you be involved and participate in the show. So you can do like these nice folks have come come to Birmingham, be part of our live audience. You can send us a question by writing to threshold@EWTN.com, or call us during the live broadcast, which is on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you're in North America, the phone number is 800-221-9460. Or if you're outside North America, or if you're right here in Birmingham, call 205-271-2980. All right. Now, again, we've been talking a lot about the relationship between philosophy and theology. And he's going to talk about one more type of relationship between philosophy and theology, which is when theology calls on philosophy for help. And that this is very important. Theology, he says, has always needed and still needs the contribution of philosophy. That's a very important element. And theology itself is a work of critical reason in the light of faith. That's what it means to do theology. Theology is critical reason in the light of faith, based on revelation and having faith in what God has revealed. That's what theology is about. And in varying degrees, in varying ways, all Christians are theologians. Every Christian reflects on their faith to some extent. So, as such, theology presupposes philosophy. It uses the tools of thinking, and it requires, in all of its research in theology, a reason that is formed and educated to form concepts and arguments. That, there are a lot of differences of trying to understand theology, because you're dealing with God who is infinite. God is beyond the mind of human beings. But we know some things about him, and we can try to think through what is useful, and also pay attention to the ideas that are rabbit trails that don't go anywhere. So this is what we try to do. Theology needs philosophy as a partner in dialogue in order to confirm the intelligibility of faith, because that's one of the things too. Faith is intelligible. It makes good sense on lots of levels. And we need philosophy to help us with that. And also, philosophy helps us see that faith is not just something about one culture. It's not just, faith is not just something for people who come from a Jewish background. But faith has universal truth. A truth you can explain to people everywhere. And, I've been so blessed to go to so many different parts of the world and to see people who are such strong, committed believers, whether they are the highly sophisticated and educated people of Europe and the West in general, or whether it is tribal people who come to Christian faith after being headhunters. I mean, I've met them too. They had heads. Well, the neighbors have human heads hanging. They're the ones who aren't Catholics yet. But the Catholics took down the heads and they put up the Stations of the Cross instead. I think that's an improvement. And so this is something that it doesn't matter what culture, they could see that there is a truth of the Christian faith, no matter what their culture might be. And what a lot of us of European extraction oftentimes forget is that our ancestors were converted to the faith while they were still barbarians. I didn't pretty much didn't matter where they were from. They were pretty barbaric. And so this also was an improvement. Some of our ancestors used to ride around horses also with human heads dangling from the ends of their spears. They had axes in the other hand so they could cut the heads off. But this is the way that our ancestors were. And Christ made a lot of improvements in us over that. So this is something that's very important to have the universal truth of the claims of faith explained so that every culture can understand it and accept it. Now, the Pope mentions it's not by accident that the fathers of the church, who mostly were Greek in their language and knew Greek philosophy, especially Plato, as well as those who knew Latin, especially a little bit later on, and then later on, the medieval theologians, who also learned philosophy from the fathers of the church and from the church itself. They adopted non-Christian philosophies. Plato wasn't a Christian. Aristotle wasn't a Christian. The Stoics were not Christians. But they could find a lot of truth in those different schools of philosophy. And they used that. So that was very important. And that fact, this is an historical fact, that they used Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and other philosophers, that shows that the value of philosophy comes from it being autonomous from the faith. It's not the same thing as the faith. The faith can use it as a tool, as we've said many times in going through this. But the philosophy is autonomous from the faith. And that is a positive value. And that autonomy that philosophy has, that it stands on its own principles of logic, that is something that remains unimpaired even when theology uses philosophy. You still have the reasoning and thinking process very much belong to philosophy, even when theology uses it. And that's one of the reasons why seminarians study philosophy first. They study courses in logic. And that's been the case in the Catholic universities since the Catholic Church invented the universities and established them. So this is something that's very important. But we also can see as well that philosophy can undergo very profound transformations when theology uses it. It gains new talents as something as fine as theology uses it. So that, there are a lot of philosophers out there, but the faith of St. Augustine, St. John Chrysostom, and St. Thomas Aquinas and others was able to take the tools of philosophy and move them to new questions that Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics could never comprehend. Move them way beyond what they started off with and improved them. So there is this noble and indispensable contribution of philosophy. Very positive thing that we have that is seen from the patristic period, that is the first centuries. When you look at even the 2nd century, already the rules of logic are being applied. But it really develops in the 3rd and 4th centuries and moves forward tremendously into people like St. Augustine and others. And because of this, philosophy was known as the ancilla theologiae, which means the handmaid of theology. Now, the Pope is very, I know the philosophers get a little bristly when you say that philosophy is the handmaid of theology. So calm down, smooth the hair down again. Because it's not a way to say that philosophy has a servile relationship with theology. It's not that we're saying that it's a slave or something, or that it has a purely functional role in regard to theology. The phrase handmaid of theology is used in the same kind of sense that Aristotle spoke of the experimental sciences as ancillary or as handmaidens to the primary theology, prima philosophia. So, Aristotle, what a blessing he had. You know who he tutored? His most famous student? Alexander the Great. Now, it's nothing like when one of your students does real well for himself, conquering the world, and then sends you all kinds of species that you never even heard of. They didn't have in Greece, and so that he could study it. Because Aristotle was very much interested in studying everything. Very much is a good model for somebody like St. Albert the Great, who also wanted to study anything and everything. He wanted to know as much as he could about chemistry, biology, and anatomy, all sorts of things. So also and Aristotle saw that the experimental sciences, where you learn from astronomy and the other sciences, is a help to philosophy. And in fact, later on, when the church began to start schools before it started the universities, the first schools that started under the reign of the Emperor Charlemagne, under his great genius Alcuin, they taught mathematics and astronomy and other science in order to help, and logic too, in order to help the students learn and prepare for doing philosophy. And then from philosophy, they go to theology. That was the way they did it. And that's still a good process. So today, we don't want to negate the autonomy of philosophy from theology, but we can see that there's a necessary link between philosophy and theology. That's what the Pope wants to emphasize. And that we don't want them separated. They go together. And it's good to study both. Okay? Now, he also says something very interesting about theologians. Were theologians to refuse the help of philosophy, they would run the risk of doing philosophy anyway. Even if you say, oh, I don't want anything to do with philosophy, you already are using a philosophy, but you are unaware of it. You are using your own personal philosophy, and you are probably using an undisciplined philosophy. Just like even birds use mathematics. They can count their eggs. They know if you've taken an egg up to, I think, depending on the species, 5 or 6 eggs. They can't count any higher than that, but most of the birds don't lay more eggs than that, so they don't worry about it. But they need to know 4 or 5 to know somebody's been in there taking the eggs. Now, they are not using mathematics very clearly. They don't memorize, the addition and subtraction tables, because they can't go beyond 4 or 5. But they're still unwittingly using math. Well, people, theologians included, who refuse to use philosophy are also bird brains who are unwittingly using philosophy, but without clear discipline. And it's not good to imitate bird brains. We want to use it to the best of our ability, to use logic as clearly as we can. That's a good thing. And so that's one of the things that happens. That, matter of fact, this is oftentimes the case among a lot of biblical scholars. I studied scripture, of course, and a lot of times because we were trained in philosophy, a lot weren't, and they had philosophical assumptions that they didn't bring out into the open about, for instance, philosophical assumptions about how God can or cannot do miracles. Now that's a philosophical assumption. And then they think, well, we just proved it biblically that God didn't do any miracles. No, you stated an assumption that God does not do miracles, and then say that you proved it, but you are unwittingly using a philosophy that closes the action of God out of the physical world. That's a philosophical assumption. So this is something that we want to make sure we don't do. We don't want to do a poor quality of philosophy, but rather use it well to help understand the faith. On the other side, if philosophers shun theology completely, then they have to try and master what's the content of Christian faith on their own. And a lot of philosophers try that. And, they come up with an understanding of Christianity that is as profound as a 3-year-old's understanding of where the next baby brother and sister is coming from. They have only the most general sense, but it's very vague and uninformed. And they really do need to know a lot more when they're ready for it. And this is a good thing to know where babies come from at the right time. Parents being the one, I think, the best ones to tell when it's the right time to explain all those things. But philosophers who shun theology and its assumptions are also kind of immature in the way that they understand religion. And what they tend to do is ridicule it. That's the tendency. When they don't really understand theology, they just make faith look ridiculous as a way to dismiss it. And that's not so helpful for them either. So we have to make sure that we guarantee that each of these sciences, philosophy and theology, has its own autonomy, its own principles, and that there's a good dialogue between them, and that they help each other. When philosophy takes that stance, then, of course, like theology, it does come under the guidance and authority of the church's magisterium. The magisterium will say certain things about some philosophies because the magisterium has the task, magisterium being the teaching authority of the church, to be able to discern that some philosophies are going to be very fruitful and some not so fruitful. A good example, they really weren't so sure in the days of Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great. They were not so sure that Aristotle was that helpful a philosophy. They'd been using Plato for centuries, and they really questioned whether Aristotle was useful. But then, as they paid attention to the way people like Thomas Aquinas was using it, then they could see, aha, this is helpful. Whereas, on the other hand, we've also seen more recently that there was a school of theology known as liberation theology, where they tried to use the philosophy of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels Now, that's ended up being more problematic because one of Marx's starting points is that there is no God. That really doesn't help theology a whole lot. So they said that, this is not so good. And then also the fact that Marx focused on class warfare. And Christianity calls for the poor loving the rich and the rich loving the poor, instead of a clash and a war between them. That was one of the things that they said, no, that's not so good. We don't want to encourage that kind of revolution. There might be some good analyses of economics that you might be able to borrow, and maybe not. And that's again where the science of economics needs to be looked at. But, in fact, it was Catholic priests, especially Dominicans and Jesuits in the 1600s, who were the founders of economic theory, long before Marx came around. And people like Hayek, a very famous, matter of fact, Nobel Prize winner, I believe, economist from Austria, who had said that you have to go to the early, the priests of the 1600s to begin to understand economics. And Marx is not a starting point. In fact, you kind of need to use some of their ideas and other economists as well to understand Marx or Adam Smith, because these priests were using Thomas's philosophy to analyze inflation, changes in monetary value, and the money market. Can you imagine? Back in the 1600s, on the basis of Thomistic philosophy and theology. And as a result, Adam Smith comes much later using some of their principles, but he didn't start it. That's one of the interesting things you learn from good economists. And the liberation theology was not so good. And then, of course, it didn't help that in the 80s, we began to see the fall of Marxism. And that every Marxist state that got the opportunity to get rid of Marxism did so. And you saw all over Eastern Europe final clearance closeout sales on statues of Marx and Lenin. I have a couple here from Hungary. They remember, and they literally did. There were just all these storage yards full of statues of Marx and Lenin that they had made out of metal that then were able to be used for other things. So these are some examples where the magisterium discerns these things, and that the truths of the faith will make certain demands, and philosophy and theology respect each other, but both have to respect each other. And that'll be very important. All right, we're going to take a break, come back in just a couple minutes. I want to get your questions, emails, and questions from our studio audience, so please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you and welcome back. First of all, we want to welcome all these folks who have come here and invite you to come here as well. If you can, please contact our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966. Or go to the website EWTN.com. They'll give you information about scheduling of masses, the programs where you can be in the audience, and tours of the studios, and information about places to stay and places to eat. Already, this one gentleman was, talking about how he's craving the fried green tomatoes over at the Irondale Cafe and Hamburger Heaven. And of course, there's Golden Rule Barbecue. I mean, the religiously oriented restaurants of Irondale, Alabama are very significant. And then, of course, we have some folks over from Louisiana, and they know good cooking, so they'll be good critics of whether this stuff is any good at all, right? Because they know what to do with fat and sugar in Louisiana. They make everything taste good, so plus spices. So come on down and join us, and we'd love to have you here. All right, now let's take some questions. Let's start off with Marie. Hello, Marie. Marie, you there? You're on the air. Maybe not. I think we don't have Marie. We'll see if we can come back to her. Let's take a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Oh, that's just down the road from us. And is there not a very famous national championship, multiple-time football team in that town?
It seems that there is.
Yes, I think there is.
Roll Tide.
I just thought I'd be egging that on. And so your question?
Yes, Father, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there are 5 precepts of the church listed. And I found a 6th and a 7th that are not listed. So are there 5 or are there 7?
All right. Now, I grew up with 6. And, and these precepts of the church are very important, but the ones that you found, you only found 5 in the catechism. What you found missing, let her hang on to that a second, just make sure I understand the question. The one you found missing was what?
To keep the laws of the church concerning marriage.
Yeah, now I don't know why they don't have it listed as one of the precepts, because that still is true. And though I know that the Catechism has a section on the sacraments in which they talk about the teachings of the church on marriage. But then you said there's a 7th? What was that?
Yes, that I found online on one of the Catholic websites. And the 7th was to go out and evangelize.
Yes, and though I remember that sharing the gospel was always one of the precepts of the church. So I don't know why they made that a 7th, but those are I do recall that those are what we do, and especially not only especially now. I've been reading a history of the 16th century. And in the late 16th century, the Capuchins and the Jesuits and the Barnabites went all over Italy doing what was, for them then, a new evangelization. They needed to do re-evangelize. And this is something that was very important then and is still important today, because Pope St. John Paul the Great called us to a new evangelization. And we're going to be having more on that, because Pope Francis is also just as committed to the new evangelization as Pope Benedict was and St. John Paul II. So now, and then one of the great things, there are all sorts of ways to evangelize. I hear a lot of people citing a quote of St. Francis of Assisi, of always evangelize, use words when necessary. You know what? He never said that. I don't know where they got that from. It sounds like a change of a quote of Francis de Sales, who said something like that. But St. Francis of Assisi did not say that. And he himself used word, action, and imagery. Who put the Stations of the Cross in our churches? The Franciscans. Who started the Christmas creche? St. Francis of Assisi. Now, he did a living when he got a real baby, he got a real axe and a real ass, and he got people there to be Mary and Joseph and shepherds. They had real shepherds because they had them around. So they did, and it's a little cave, in Italy where he did the first Christmas creche. And there's this image. So he used images to help us in our imagination. He preached and he lived the gospel. So it's all of that. And we just have to adapt it to our own times today. One of the interesting things is that what they did in Italy, the Jesuits in southern Italy started doing this. When they were celebrating the carnival, what in French would be called Mardi Gras, but in Italian was called Carnevale, they would have Eucharistic processions and confessions. Now, the people doing the carnival needed the confessions, not unlike the people at Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Ladies from Louisiana, am I right on that? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And so maybe that's what we need to do. Instead of the Mardi Gras parade, start having Eucharistic processions down the streets of New Orleans, calling some of those children to repent. But that would be another way of doing the evangelization that we need to do. Have another question. Sir, where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Houston, Texas.
Yeah, you've got a deep Houston accent. So you're from Hungary originally, right?
Right.
Yeah.
My question is, how far is Castel Gandolfo from the St. Peter's Basilica? And what happens when the Pope goes on vacation, goes in Castel Gandolfo? What happens to the previous Pope who is residing over there?
Okay. Well, first of all, Castel Gandolfo, I think, is about 75, maybe 90 miles away. It's not real far. It just takes, depending on Italian traffic, that can be pretty messy. But it's not all that far from the Vatican. And the reason they go there, Rome is along the Tiber River. And there were a lot of swamps. Now, they've been drained in modern times, but there were a lot of swamps near Rome. And malaria just was rampant in July and August and early September. So almost everybody left Rome because of the malaria. It was very dangerous to stay there. And that's why they went up to the mountains, because the mosquitoes couldn't get up there. So, and it's around the crater of an old volcano. And if both, Benedict XV, Pope Emeritus, and Pope Francis are there, there's plenty of room. It's a big place. That's why it's a castle. There's plenty of room for both of them there. But Pope Benedict doesn't reside there. He resides in a convent in Vatican City behind the St. Peter's and that. So he's actually living in Vatican City, but they can both go up there because it wouldn't be all that healthy to stay in Rome. So that's why they do that. Very ancient. And then, the Pope has his audiences there at Castel Gandolfo. That's very important. All right. Now we have Marie on the line. You there, Marie?
Yes, I'm here, Father.
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from New York, Syracuse.
Great. Oh, Syracuse, New York. Great.
Yes.
And your question?
Father, when we're told that we can pray to the Blessed Mother, to the angels and saints, and even our family members that have passed away, for intercession, with your knowledge and your understanding, are we to believe that that these people that have passed, or the Blessed Mother and the saints, are actually given a special gift of a special gift, like a divine gift, to be able to hear more people at the same people, or to be able to hear different people at the same time, like the Lord knows everything and can hear prayers from different people at the same time. Are we to understand this through your?
Sure. Let Marie stay on the line a second. Let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, pay attention to the book of Revelation. I believe it's chapter 7, where a number of Christians who were martyred are aware they're in heaven, and they know that the people on earth are still suffering martyrdom. So first of all, Marie, we have evidence in Scripture that there was that the saints in heaven can hear us. So does that help as a start?
Oh, yes, yes.
Good. Secondly, something very important. Now, you are a lady, and you have an advantage over most of us men. That is, women are famous for being able to double task, where men tend not to be quite so good at that. We need to be a little more focused on what we're doing. But even with double tasking, that sort of is about it. You know, maybe you can do 3 things. Some experienced moms and grandmoms can do 3 things at once. But it starts to, because we live in time, and we're limited by time. The saints do not live on earth. And we make a mistake to think that the limits of time that we have here also apply to heaven. They don't have those limits. And it's not that they're infinite. Only God is infinite. But the saints are, are outside of time. And so Our Lady and the other saints can hear more than one petition at a time, because it doesn't come to them in distinct seconds. You know why? There's no clock in heaven. They don't have seconds. They don't have hours. They don't have any time at all. Does that help, Marie?
Yes, so it's more of a heavenly quality than an earthly quality.
Exactly.
It's
And that's
something
why we
don't-
want to go there.
Right, it's something we don't understand, but we just have to believe.
Here, think of it this way. Do you have any pets?
Yes,
All right, what do you have, a dog or a cat or what?
a cat.
Okay, so do I. I've got cats. And the cats, I don't know about yours, but my cats don't even respond to their own names. Now, I know their names, but they don't. They respond to other signals I can give them. But that's it. So I know with the Tom, I can sort of pat on my chest and he'll come to me. But if I call his name, he looks at me like a real dope. What are you talking about? So he just doesn't understand. Some cats do know their name. Dogs tend to recognize names. But that's kind of it. If you start, as I've said many times, the tomcat especially loves to sit on my lap when I pray my office. Not because he wants to pray, but because he scratches his ear on the zipper of the case that holds my office book. And that's what he understands. And then he knows that I'll scratch his head too. So, they have a limited understanding. Now, the gap between us and the cats is minuscule compared to the gap between us and God. And there's also a bigger gap between the cats and us and the saints and us. The saints have a bigger gap. And so, we're just trying to do the best we can to understand all we can. We are smarter than the cats, but we still have a limit. And so things will be a little bit more clear when we get there. Okay? All right, now let's have another caller. Hello, Carissa? Carissa, you there?
Yes, Father.
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from San Jose, California.
Oh, great. That's beautiful. As a matter of fact, I'll be coming there in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. I'll be over at
that's
the
good.
Shrine of Our Lady of Peace.
Okay.
And so your question?
Is there evidence in Scripture that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute? If not, how does this notion come about?
Okay. No, there is not. There is not evidence that she was a prostitute. But the reason it came out is that there was where a place, there's in Luke 7, it speaks about a prostitute that washed Jesus' feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. And then not long after, it mentions Mary Magdalene. And so a number of people assumed that it was Mary Magdalene that was the woman. But that was their hypothesis. So that wasn't correct. So that's, and the church is teaching. But you see, that just became part of the assumption fairly early in the church, in the patristic times. And that's why you can always tell in art which woman at the cross is Mary Magdalene, because she never has a veil. You know, loose women in that culture did not wear veils. So that's a way of showing that, okay, as opposed to the other women. But, you know, that was a later supposal, okay? All right. Here I have an email here. Hi, Father Mitch. I recently heard a sermon by a Protestant minister that I respect, and he said, if you are not walking in God's will and have not surrendered your will to His, it makes it almost impossible for God to answer your prayers. Let's say you have a prayer request for one of your family members, and you are committing sins, whether venial or mortal, and are not in a state of grace per se. Does that hinder the efficacy of your prayer? Would God still respond to your prayer requests? As a cradle Catholic, I don't recall any teaching like this. What are your thoughts? This is Marianne from Houston, Texas. Well, a couple things, Marianne. There are plenty of examples of people who had almost no faith, or maybe not any faith at all, and they experienced miracles. God healed them. And in the cases of, I remember back in the 70s, someone who had a major healing, they're unable to walk, and they were able to walk. It was an atheist. Another was somebody of a non-Christian religion. And but after that, the miracle caught their attention, and they became Christians. So sometimes God may show a miracle to somebody with little or no faith, and maybe not even much of a moral life. But He does so in order to get their attention as a way to offer them the chance to make an act of faith, or else. Okay, that's one possibility. And on the other hand, I've also known, I'll never forget a lady that I knew back in Nashville, Tennessee. Incredible woman of faith. And she did all kinds of things with faith. You know, just strong in her morals, strong in her faith, and she prayed hard, and the disease that was killing her never got healed. And this is something that, you know, it's, you know, you can't make a rule. If you have a lot of faith, you get miracles, or if you have no faith, you don't get miracles. It's not so simple, because God is acting in different people in different ways. And I'm not in charge of that. And I cannot set rules for how God has to answer prayers of people of great faith, and people, or not answer people of no faith. This is like a lot of things, way beyond my capacity to understand. So I don't worry about it. I don't worry about it. But I would say this in general, Marianne, that when I am asking for prayers, I will ask anybody. I will ask anybody to pray for me. And I frequently do. But I am a bit more likely to go to the saints than I am to the big sinners. The church has not made Al Capone the patron of anything, not even of bootleggers. Okay, we don't have patrons for that. No, we don't. No, I mean, I would ask for Al's prayers if I knew him, but he would not be the first one I'd go to. I'd be much more likely to go to Mother Angelica than to Al Capone. Al Capone was more powerful in his day, but I still wouldn't ask him for his prayers so much as I would Mother Angelica or Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Much more likely to ask them than I would an atheist. Okay? So in general, I would say, yes, somebody who is holy and does the will of God is more likely to pray well and with wisdom. But it's not that they earn the right for God to automatically answer them. That would be going too far. And that the sinners don't automatically get excluded from having their prayers answered. God is going to be a little bit bigger than any rules I can make. So keep that in mind. Now I have another caller. Hello, Maria?
Yes,
Hi, where are you from?
I am from Naples, Florida.
Oh, great. Nice town. And your question?
My question is, what answer is to give to somebody that they say, can we go and spend some time with you? I will live there because I live near the water in Florida, but they are coming from Europe, and they are not married. It's a couple. They had a child 2-3 years ago. They had a child, but they're both divorced and they are not married. They are distant relatives. What's the best answer to give? I really said I don't have enough space because it's true. I have a small room, but I should have said, I think, more. And because I have to go back in case they said it again, what should I explain it exactly?
You know, here's one of the things about that kind of situation, is that they are asking you to go against your conscience. You believe that marriage is the way to make a commitment to each other and to the children, and that the relationship they have to each other and their child is not something disposable, that there is, you know, you only get one mother and one father. That's it. Even if you don't know your father or your mother, you only have one. And this is an irreplaceable relationship that needs the blessing of God and the grace of the sacrament. And for them to ask you to do that is to ask you to go against your values. And that they don't have a right to expect you to contradict your Catholic faith and morals. So you have every right to say, you know, this is contrary to my conscience. And so I'd rather not have people who are unmarried to come to stay in my house as if everything was fine. I'm not there to give that approval. All right, I just have a few seconds for a quick question here from Dane in Huntsville, Alabama. Why did some books or Gospels not make it into the New Testament of the Bible? Thank you. The show is a blessing. Very simple, Dane. The Gospels that did not make it in tended to be really dumb. They, for instance, they taught that the God who made the physical world was an evil God because the physical world is evil. The church said, no, that's not it. Secondly, they could not be traced back to the apostles. They were written 100 years or more after the apostles died. So they were not eyewitnesses. So the church never accepted them. All right? Very simple. All right. Lord bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and lead you in all your ways by his peace. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And again, mind you, especially during these summer months, please remember to keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill. I know you go on vacation, but our bill collectors don't. So do try to remember us. Thank you.